Okay, thank you all. Thanks for everyone for being here. We are working to make sure our speakers are available. We do have Katerina Lima from Deaf Incorporated, and she is going to be able to present to us. So we look forward to that, and hopefully our other speaker and the interpreters will join us as well. So our first, we've done introductions in the chat, so I don't think we need to do that. But we do need to, for our administrative business, just approve our minutes from October, which Kim has sent out. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the October meeting? Deb, thank you. Is there a second? Melissa, thank you. So we have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you all. So we do have a mini grants outcome report, and we have Kelly Meany here from Matthew's Gift. So Kelly, thank you for being here, and please share with us what you did with the grant you received.
Hi. Thanks for having us, and thank you so much for the grant too. So Matthew's Gift, what we do is we donate resources to hospitals to help the families that are faced with stillbirth and neonatal death. So the grant that we got from you guys was to help the families at the hospitals at CID in Plymouth, South Shore Hospital in Weymouth, and also the two Brockton hospitals. And it was towards like a family support program that we were doing. And there's two parts of it. One is geared towards the parents, and the resources from this grant were directed towards one book that was called Loved Baby. It's geared towards the mom, and it is a Christian-based book, and it helps guide the mom through the loss of her baby and how to find hope and joy again. But there's also other books that we include in the package towards the parents. One is geared towards the dad, and it's Grieving Fathers, and it's a guide of what to do, because when you're put in that situation, you don't know what to do. You're kind of at a loss. The dads don't know what to do. The moms don't know what to do. The dads just want to take charge, but there's really no guidance. So it's a nice small book that he can just tuck in his pocket. And then there is a third book that has been in that packet that we've added as well, called Empty Arms. And that is also a book geared towards both of them. And the first half of it is a guide for both of them of the most important things that they're going to need to pay attention to, and have different things addressed that they're not going to think about. And then how to move forward in their life, and how to find joy again, and how to just be around other people again. And then the second part of our program that we do is therapeutic sibling kits. And that's to help the siblings for these, the families who have lost the babies. And the reason we did that is because when we lost our baby, Matthew, my daughter, she went through a very traumatic grief response, and it was delayed by like 9 months. So she was in therapy for quite a long time. She still is, actually. So we wanted to do something for the families that acknowledged the siblings, because she wasn't acknowledged at all through anything, and we were just told to keep it simple, and the kids are resilient, and don't really bring much up to them, and they'll just get on with everything. But it was not the right thing to do. So we provide them with a box, and they get a weighted teddy bear. It's called a comfort cup. And that is therapeutic to them, with it being weighted. It's scientifically proven to be therapeutic and provide comfort, and releases different chemicals in the brain for comfort. We provide them with a notebook to use as a journal, some crayons, some colored pencils, a worry animal, which is a stuffed Yeti. And the idea there is it has a zipper for a mouth. I wish I had one on hand to show you. It comes with a little notebook, and they or their caretaker can write down what their worry is, and they get it out of their brain, and then they stick it into the mouth of this little Yeti, and they zip it up. That's symbolic, and it gets it out of their head and gets it away. And it is also a tool for the parent or the caretaker to go in and see this is what they're worrying about. And this could be related to the loss of the child, or this could be related to something else going on in their life. And we also provide a book that guides them through what's really for the whole family, these precious people, and how it just talks about kind of like at conception, all the way through as the baby's being formed, and then the baby suddenly passes. But it's a very child-friendly book. It's very colorful, like illustrated very nicely, and it was illustrated and authored by another mom who also had lost some babies. So that is how we used our resources, and that's what we do.
Great, thank you, Kelly. So about how many families have you been able to help through the grant?
48.
48, okay. Great, that's a lot. It's a lot of families. Any other questions for Kelly? And you can feel free to put them in the chat as well. Okay, so I don't think we have any questions. So Kelly, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to move to our speakers. We have our speakers here, and I see that we have one of our interpreters here as well. So I want to welcome Samantha and Katerina, and I'm going to spotlight, if I can, the Wendy, who is our interpreter. Let me see if I can figure this out.
Michael, if you want to assign me co-host, I can spotlight myself.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Sure. And when Anna arrives, you can also assign her a co-host as well.
Okay, so it's telling me to change the host to Wendy.
You can't assign co-host?
Let me see.
It may be under the participants list as opposed to on my picture.
I have spotlight for everyone and make host.
Okay, we'll go with spotlight for everybody, but then I'll have to talk to you when we switch interpreters.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Well, thank you for being here. And thank you also to Samantha Kistner, who is the cultural broker for our deaf survivors. And Samantha's asking me to allow screen sharing. This is great. We're just, yeah, here we go. That's under security, so I need to go to security. All right. Okay, screen share allowed. So Samantha, you should be able to screen share now. And thank you so much for being here. And thank you also to Katerina Lima, who is from Deaf Incorporated. And we're going to be hearing from both Samantha and Katerina. So Samantha, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Is it possible for me, Katerina, and Wendy to be spotlighted? It helps so the three of us can see each other to make communication more clear.
I'm sure it's possible, but the question is, how do I do it?
So go to my picture, top right corner, 3 dots, add spotlight. You can spotlight up to 6 people, but
Okay,
we
the
just
problem
wanted
is I'm on an iPad.
If you make me
So
the host, I can manage all these requests I have of you.
I will happily make you the host.
I will give it back when we are done.
All right. So you are now the host, Samantha. Take it away.
Great.
Thank you.
Now I need to find Katerina. There you are. There's a lot of people here. I see you now. That's why we need a spotlight. So if you don't notice any difference with me spotlighting it, it's because you need to change your view to speaker view. I see you. Go ahead.
This is Katerina. I actually have a PowerPoint to share. So when you're done, Samantha, you can give me the ability to share the screen too.
Okay, I will. If anyone notices Anna Purcell joining, can you please let me know? Oh, there you are.
Yep, she's on there.
It's hard to see everyone, and it's also hard to manage PowerPoints and being the host. Okay, great. We have 2 interpreters here. The reason we use 2 interpreters is for turn taking. One interpreter will likely voice for us, and the other interpreter will sign for us. I'm not sure how many people in this room are familiar with using sign language interpreters. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share a PowerPoint. It's going to be brief. It's going to be about how our Deaf Survivor Center and the people here in this room can work together. If anyone in this room is interested in a very in-depth training regarding working with deaf victims of IPV and sexual violence, I can do that on another time. Those hours can take between those trainings can take between 1 and 2 hours. So I'm Samantha Kistner from our Deaf Survivor Center. Like I said, the cultural broker. And Katerina, do you want to just introduce yourself again real quick, and then we can go ahead with the PowerPoints?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Katerina Lima. I believe I've already put that in the chat. I'm the Regional Director for Deaf Incorporated in the Southeast and Cape Cod region. The Cape Cod region also includes the islands. My office location is actually in New Bedford. And we have another office that covers Cape Cod, which is located in Hyannis. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Can Katerina, can you still see the interpreters clearly?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, it changes my view, so I just want to make sure before I go ahead. Okay, this is how we can all work together. So our Deaf Survivor Center's mission statement is here to provide culturally affirmative support services for deaf survivors of sexual and domestic violence through education, empowerment, and advocacy, and to promote awareness of cultural and linguistic considerations to service providers working with the deaf. This is our clinical supervisor. Her name is Kristen Crossan. She handles the referrals for new cases. If myself or my other coworker gets contacted about a referral, we're going to screen it through Kristen. But here's her contact information. She is deaf, so you will call a video phone. She's flexible. She's typically available Monday through Friday for a few hours each day. This is me. I can forward this PowerPoint, so this contact information is available to you at any time. I I'm typically available Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I can be flexible when needed with advance notice. I joined our Deaf Survivor Center in 2014 as a volunteer for the video phone hotline. Unfortunately, due to low victim contact, the hotline was closed in 2017. And then in 2018, I was hired to be the cultural broker. This is the newest addition to our team, Rebecca. She's the victim advocate. We recently got an OVW grant in 2021, and we're able to expand our program to have Rebecca, our victim advocate, and to be open Monday through Friday. So working with us, the goal is, with proper education and training, all public resources should be accessible and accommodating to the deaf and hard of hearing survivors of IPV. So it's a violation of the ADA to decline services due to disability, including accommodations needed due to a disability, communication access. We find that agencies sometimes unintentionally will discriminate by refusing to provide interpreters because they lack resources and education. So we are here to, the cultural broking is to unite the hearing victim services and the deaf survivors to be able to work together. So our goal is to work with domestic violence agencies and advocacy centers, police departments, and community service providers to approve services and referrals for everybody. So there's 2 agencies in Massachusetts that provide deaf advocacy. So our agency focuses on intimate partner violence, and sexual violence can be a tool in intimate partner violence. Pathways for Change focuses on sexual violence counseling and our response team for things such as assault and rape. Our services can overlap and we can share clients. If you are not sure who to refer to, we have open communication with each other and will refer to the appropriate agency if we feel that the other one should be involved or the case should be theirs. But if you were to experience someone who has been raped or trafficked, reach out to Sabrina Glover, the director of the Deaf Services Program. Both of these services are statewide. Both of them are based in Worcester. Unfortunately, our Deaf Survivor Center is not open 24/7. And although we are open Monday through Friday, it can be limited capacity, such as I may be working on Wednesday, but I've traveled for court across the state, which means I'm not available to respond. So we can't respond to emergencies. So we utilize these 2 hotlines here, or we'll ask you to utilize them too. SafeLink is well known for providing updates on whether or not there's shelter beds, but they also can do emergency safety planning on their hotline. And on the right, the Deaf Hotline. The Deaf Hotline is managed in Seattle, Washington, from ADWAS, which is Abused Deaf Women's Advocacy Service, and they're a sister agency to our Deaf Survivor Center. They helped build us up. So it's nationwide 24/7 video phone hotline services, meaning a deaf person can call and directly chat in sign language on the video phone with the advocate and not use an interpreter. They also provide email, text, and live chat support. They are going to be able to provide emergency safety planning, but not necessarily provide solutions for an in Massachusetts crisis. So that's why we're going to utilize both these hotline services. If you need something immediately in Massachusetts, you can use SafeLink. If you're looking for safety planning or someone to talk to because you're feeling scared or overwhelmed, we can use the Deaf Hotline. So here's a little history about our Deaf Survivor Center. So our Deaf Survivor Center began in 1999 as our Deaf Sister Survivor Center. So in April of 2014, our Deaf Survivor Center became an LLC, and that got us the VAWA grant, which created the cultural broker, the clinical supervisor, and the video phone hotline. So in 2020, our Deaf Survivor Center got the OVW grant, as I mentioned before, and we increased the cultural broker and supervisor's hours, and we created the victim advocate role 20 hours a week. So abuse is prevalent in the deaf community, which is why our Deaf Survivor Center is needed. 25% of women in the general population experience domestic violence in their lifetime, but the estimates within the deaf community are closer to 50%. So 50% of deaf women are abused at least once in their lifetime. Duration of abuse is longer for deaf victims because of a small community dynamic. The deaf community stretches nationwide, so it's hard to really escape and start over. There's the fear of not being believed if somebody who is the abuser holds a position of power or respect. And there's many conflicts of interest, partially because the deaf community is so small, but also hearing or deaf family members can become interpreters. So using interpreter services can lead to intentional or unintentional breaches of conflict, breaches of confidentiality. Accessing help, being inaccessible increases the time a person is in an abusive relationship, or accessing help, but the services are not prepared, creates delays in getting domestic violence services. So somebody could reach out. There's a cycle of violence, and there's the calm phase, the tension phase, the explosion phase, and the honeymoon phase. So someone may reach out in the tension building stage, feeling scared, looking to, get into a safe place. And they reach out to an agency for support, and the agency isn't able to respond quickly, or not the agency's fault. They're not able to get interpreters in a timely manner. So the victim goes through the explosion phase alone, unsupported. Services are then ready at the honeymoon stage, and the victim no longer wants services because either they've decided that no one's going to be able to help them, or they're in the honeymoon stage and they think maybe things are going to be better now. Excuse me. The best way to prevent delay in services is, instead of depending on interpreters, is to hire deaf staff who could respond immediately to crisis, giving them support in their first language. So why is there delay in services, and why are people stuck in abusive relationships? And it's because of autism. So it starts with the belief that the ability to hear makes someone superior to those with hearing loss. And autism leads to language deprivation. The idea that deaf people don't have the right to sign language because it would deprive them of being able to speak and listen to the best of their ability, and spoken English language is better than sign language, when really what happens if you do not give a child language between the critical age of development, that part of their brain shuts down and cannot be used anymore. So if you don't acquire language between birth and between 2 and 5, it's debated a little bit, that part of your brain shuts down. And that part of your brain shuts down means that you can never be fluent in any language, which leads to delays in every other part of your life. So the idea that English is better than sign language leads deaf people to become disabled because their brain can't develop because they're not given language. We need to be very clear that this does not happen to every deaf person. This only happens to deaf people who are deprived language. So intersectionality is the framework that everyone's experience, their identity to these different parts of their lives can either create privilege or cause discrimination. So deaf people who can speak are treated better than deaf people who cannot or will not, with the addition of deaf people have the ability to do anything except for hear, but some deaf people have additional disabilities that make some things harder to obtain, such as gainful employment or independence. And thank you for listening to that. That was a short version of the things I can educate people more on when, if your agency would like to book me for a more in-depth training. And I'm going to hand it over to Katerina now. Oops. Great.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all can see my slides, my PowerPoint presentation. If we can hold for just 1 minute. Unfortunately, I had a little bar blocking my complete view of the screen, so I just had to move a few things. There, I wasn't able to forward the slide, but now I can. Deaf Inc.'s mission is to inspire people to achieve personal and professional goals through accessible programs and services. We build bridges across communities by increasing communication access and awareness. Deaf Inc. is a nonprofit agency that receives funding from the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing and other private funds. Our executive director is Darian Burwell Gambrell. She just joined our agency recently. Our agency focuses on the deaf, hard of hearing, and late deafened community to empower people to gain independence and independent living skills. There are several satellite offices. I work in the Southeast and oversee the Southeast, Cape Cod, and the islands. We have 2 offices there, one in Hyannis and the other being in New Bedford. There are 3 offices in the Northeast, the North Shore. Our headquarters are in Allston, so the Boston area, and service the Boston region. And there are other independent living services available in Western Mass that cover those regions. And the acronym DILS stands for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Independent Living Service Programs that provide advocacy, skills training, information and referral, and peer counseling. So we have interpreters and CART available that we advocate for the use of in private offices and in courtrooms. We work with, in collaboration with the MCDHH, the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing case managers. We also work with our Deaf Survivors Center, with any of their consumers. We feel it's important to work together, but we have different roles when we do work with the same consumer. There are people that work, we work with communication access. We focus on that. We also help with housing and advocate for housing and skills training, while the commission works with people for legal issues and communication access. But we also help people who need assistance navigating state assistance, for example, SNAP, and various things that they might need training or more, learning more to become more independent, utilizing what is available in their communities. I've had people come looking for job skills training and different equipment that they need, and we can provide some information for them to receive those services. If they have issues with needing support regarding domestic violence, I refer, and our staff refer them to our Deaf Survivors Center. So we act as a referral agency as well. We have peer counselors, people who have also had hearing loss, how to deal with communication within the family, how to various coping strategies they can use, and how to interact with peers, people who have the same experience, so they can advocate for themselves. There might be people who have experienced substance use disorder, domestic violence, and so I refer them to the appropriate agency when they can also work with other deaf and hard of hearing peers who have had that shared experience. We do not have therapists under our auspices. I am not a licensed therapist. So if I feel that somebody is coming and their issues really need more of a trained counselor therapist, I refer to agencies that have counselors and licensed social workers who are proficient in ASL. I can't hear the interpreter, but I'm just checking on seeing if she's caught up, and I can see that she is. So I might have jumped ahead a little bit, but this is what we do in terms of advocacy, navigating the legal system for recent immigrants, technology, hearing aids, etc. We provide support for health insurance, help them navigate that system. We have a deaf parent group that can help support, a peer support group. Medical support systems are in place. And again, some of this information is overlapping, but I think it's important for you to see what we do in terms of communication coping strategies for skills training, specific equipment that are utilized by deaf and hard of hearing people. For example, strobe lights, ringing doorbells that have assisted technology, have lights that deaf people will be able to see when the doorbell rings. So there are visual alert systems and vibrating alarms to wake a deaf person up. And smoke alarms and different safety equipment that's vital. We also do information and referral for technology assistance and training. If a doctor doesn't understand how to work with their deaf patients, we will come in and do some training in that arena. We also refer to assist different resources that can also help to educate and ensure that their offices and clinics are accessible to deaf and hard of hearing people. Again, we provide peer counseling. So people who have also gone through the same lived experience that our consumers are going through are able to help them get through various systems and provide support. We also have another program. It's called Title 7B. It's a federal funded program for people who cannot afford certain equipment that allows them to be independent at home. So it would cover some of the costs for hearing aids, the visual alert systems, for example, the visual doorbell. There are various things that people can use to improve their life, and they need to go and find different hearing aids that match their needs. Some people need a smaller, lighter device depending on their audiological needs, and some are stronger. So it depends on the severity of their hearing loss. And so there's different technology available to meet them where they are. So that federal funding for assistive technology is available throughout the state of Massachusetts. And at the beginning, I showed you a map of our regions, and it goes throughout the Western regions also. Although it's not our agency, other agencies are available to provide the same types of support, and then certainly Title 7B support is available to people in Western Mass as well. Deaf Inc. also has an additional program called Deafblind Community Access Network, and DBCAN. Elaine Ducharme is the executive director for DBCAN. And this provides SSPs for deafblind, deaf people who are blind, have a visual loss in addition to a hearing loss. An SSP can assist a person going out into the community, but also provide some trainings. Well, the SSPs are trained to work with people if they need to travel, go shopping, go to different social events, maybe church, a deaf event in the community. A deafblind person could utilize a service provider for those activities to help them navigate transportation and the event. And if anybody's interested, please feel free to contact Elaine Ducharme if you know of people who would require any of this assistance. If you are interested in becoming a service provider too, please feel free to contact Elaine. We're always looking for service providers. And an additional program at Deaf Inc. is the ASL program. They provide classes for adults who are interested in learning American Sign Language and learning about deaf culture. Those classes are available in the fall, winter, and spring. Excuse me, the interpreter cannot see Katerina for a second because
Russian Sign Language.
There's a monthly social that we host for people who are interested in that program, and it's free. Excuse me, feel free to contact Robert Martin about that. He is the director of the ASL program, and we try to have the monthly ASL socials offered for people who are interested. Robbie and Elaine Ducharme's office is in Boston, and their headquarters in Alston. So please feel free to take a screenshot of this and my contact information. If you need our services, you will be connected to our front desk. And I'll finish, but I'm just going to leave that up for a minute if you want to take a screenshot of my information. And so thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
I think we're open
Great.
for questions, or
Yes.
we can pass it back to Mike.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Katerina. This is a great presentation, and I had a few questions for both of you to kick things off. Samantha, I want to ask a little bit more about autism and language deprivation, because I think that certainly makes sense. That if someone's deprived of their language, I mean, we hear about parenting strategies of, you talk to your kids so they can develop their language. So it makes sense. It's kind of reasonable and follows that the same would apply for a deaf child. But I guess the idea of autism, that spoken language is superior to ASL, a sign language. I can, as a hearing person, I can say that, well, I don't feel that I have that belief, but can you talk a little bit about how that might be an unconscious belief that people have and how that sort of plays out? I know it's a big topic, but how that sort of plays out in different systems and how it impacts people who are deaf and hard of hearing?
Yeah, and I know Katerina just turned off her screen, but I hope that she can chime in when she comes back. I know that she's very busy in the office. So let me start with saying that genetic deafness is not as frequent as people may imagine. 90% of deaf kids are born to hearing parents who are not prepared for a deaf child. So they could either be slow to pick up sign language or refuse to pick up sign language. Katerina, join and interrupt me anytime you want to talk about autism. So there is the belief that deafness needs to be cured and fixed. So parents are told to use cochlear implants and hearing aids and to speak and lip read only. That's autism. And that belief translates to people expecting other deaf people out in the community to have the skill to lip read and the skill to talk, leading to no patience for working with a deaf person who does not have that skill, or refusing to provide interpreters. Autism manifests in other ways, such as like patronization. To say something to a deaf person like, oh, wow, you speak really well for a deaf person is patronizing. Or speaking to a deaf person in a way that's inappropriate for their age, like, oh, wow, you can drive. So deaf people can do everything except for hear, and most people think that deaf people are only capable of menial jobs, like working at a grocery store. Whereas I work with many deaf professionals who are licensed social workers. There's licensed psychologists, DMH workers. Deaf people are very successful. And the idea of autism is, oh, those must be really rare, special cases. And it's just not true at all. There's many successful deaf professionals in the field. However, there's a study by, what's it called? The part of the name is the research study of post-secondary outcomes, but I'm forgetting the first half of the title. But there's rampant employment discrimination. So about 75% of hearing people who want to be employed are employed, but only 50% of deaf people are employed. And it's because people refuse to interview or hire deaf people, because they make assumptions on what deaf people can and cannot do. That's autism. That's discrimination. The idea that what you think deaf people can and cannot do, but also layer that with, if you meet a deaf person who can speak, you assume they can do more than a deaf person who cannot. You assume that someone who can speak and read lips is more capable than a deaf person who uses sign language. So deaf people can drive. They can go to college, they can have families, they can have gainful employment. In November of 2020, the Department of Children's and Families released a report saying that the department did discriminate against deaf parents. It removed their children at higher rates for unjust reasons. That's autism, the belief that deaf people cannot be parents or good parents.
Excellent. Thank you.
Katerina, do you have anything to add?
I do, of course. That DCF example is excellent. And people, I think, are reluctant often to communicate with deaf and hard of hearing folks, especially if it's text-based, which is unfortunate because that disallows the opportunity for communication. So I know that security is an issue there, but that's one that has to be considered. And I think if a deaf person's primary language is not English, the assumption is now that they're language deprived or that there's other stuff going on. Now, Deaf Incorporated as an IL agency can provide basic literacy courses, etc. And sometimes they'll bring examples of like applications, for example, a mass health application or a housing application for HUD. So I'm trying to encourage them to do as much as they can themselves, and then I'm there to assist with sign language so that if that's their primary language, then looking at a form in English, actually it has to be translated. So the deaf people, once they have more exposure to this kind of experience, they pick up how to do things like fill out these forms, but may need assistance initially. And that's due to lack of exposure, not lack of capacity. Also, it's around confidence. A lot of deaf people have struggled with English as a second language and therefore feel a lack of confidence in the ability to navigate the English speaking or text-based world, like applications. Oftentimes, deaf people are really excited to find Deaf Inc. because we're all about empowering them to do things on their own. But we can also give them the time to grow and develop the skill sets that are necessary for this kind of navigation. I remind people regularly, we're not going backwards, don't look backwards. We're going forwards, look forwards. So that's an important part of it. I think for myself, I identify as hard of hearing, and I know there are a lot of hard of hearing people out there that don't know sign language. So that's sort of a different category. And sometimes those folks have to be reminded, you know, you can't depend on your ears only. You need to shift over to functioning in the world in a more visual manner. And that's something that we can share in a way that's helpful for them in the long term. And it's a reminder, honestly, for some people.
And Katerina, would you agree that when someone's hard of hearing or losing their hearing, but they're refusing to learn sign language and they're resistant to it, it's because of autism? Do you think that's true? Or do you think I'm wrong?
Well, I think it depends. I think it's a really individual process. You know, it's hard to make general statements about somebody's process. Some people get excited about learning signs. Some have a hard time learning to shift to the visual. You know, some folks have been trained very heavily in an oral method of communication. I was lucky because I was actually born hearing and I started to lose my hearing a little bit later, but I was exposed to sign language as a young person. So in a sense, I'm privileged because I have some residual hearing and because I had early exposure to sign language. So I was then able to develop speech. I went through speech and oral classes that were incredibly annoying, but I made it through that, and that was not an easy period of life, honestly. But everybody has such an individual journey around hearing loss, it's hard to make general statements. Yeah.
Okay, very true. You're right. I want to mention before we jump to the next question is we forgot to discuss appropriate terms of identification. And this is typically where I emphasize that hearing impaired is a very rude label and to stop using it. People identify as deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, deaf blind. Ask people what they want to be called. Don't call them hearing impaired.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my next question.
Oh, Katerina wants to add something.
Yeah, just to that, again, for myself, I work at Deaf Incorporated, and even I will ask folks. And if they ask me to use the label hearing impaired, it's typically older folks that are doing that. We'll respect that, but we'll probably give them a heads up that that's not really an appropriate term anymore, that we tend to use deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing, or late deafened. And some people find that awkward. You know, they've identified themselves in a certain way all this time. But when they're given a little bit more time to think about it, oftentimes the choice is away from the label hearing impaired. Oftentimes people out in the world assume I'm deaf because I use sign language. And I'm not actually. I'm hard of hearing, audiologically speaking. But once I open that door and say, I can't hear very well, it makes it easier to communicate. If I say hard of hearing, people get really weird. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. I I'm like, okay, now I have to change myself to accommodate the situation. It depends on who I'm interacting with, how I refer to myself, honestly. I can remember a deaf person coming to me and saying, I'm deaf, are you? And and then they spoke really loudly to me. And I'm like, okay, that's actually not going to improve my hearing. I am still hard of hearing. You talking loud isn't going to fix it. But to me, that was ironic that even that idea has been internalized. That when we meet each other, that you can ask a question about, what are the communication needs you have? Again, empowering the person who's coming to you for services to tell you what kind of communication is most effective for them. That's the overall point here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A question for Katerina. You mentioned referrals to counselors or to therapists. We talk about mental health a lot in this group and the importance of having access to mental health. Can you talk a little bit about how successful you've been in being able to refer people, and maybe a little bit about some of the challenges and issues that the folks, your clientele, are dealing with in the mental health area?
Well, there are two routes. It depends if the person is already under DMH services, then I ask them to talk to a case manager, or I talk to a case manager from DMH if they're receiving those services. If the person is just in need of immediate counseling or a therapist, we do have a list of providers who are fluent in sign language. We do not prefer to send them to somebody and have interpreters being utilized. We prefer people to work with people that use their native language. And so the challenge is finding providers who accept their insurance. We just had an update of the list yesterday, and I'd be happy to email you all that. I'll send you an attachment so you can see the the providers who are fluent in our area.
Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I guess, oh, go ahead, Samantha.
I was going to ask Katerina if she had any tips for any providers who are using interpreters with deaf people or hard of hearing people. Because I think sometimes what happens is we have a lot of great providers that can sign, but their wait lists are extensive. There's a provider shortage across the state. So maybe some people here may find themselves using a sign language interpreter to provide services, and how can we help them do that?
I would say it would really be dependent on the deaf person themselves if they accept having an interpreter, because that's really a third person in that counseling session. And individually, some people are just not comfortable with that dynamic. So I think that's the first thing you need to find out, how comfortable the person is with that dynamic.
Great, thank you. I don't know if other folks have questions, but I guess my last question would be for both of you. What's the one takeaway you would want for this? We're all social service agencies. We're all helping people, helping the community. What's the one thing that anyone should be doing or can think about that would improve our ability to provide services and access to people who are deaf and hard of hearing?
If I may. Right now, if you don't have signing staff in your agency right now, we would be happy to provide training to your staff. People have TTYs still, but they're not used as often. It'll be nice for your offices. You never know what consumer is going to come and need outreach from you. So it's good to have, but deaf people use video phones now primarily, and video relay interpreters, so that when you get a deaf person, we have video phones now, so they could call me and talk directly to me because I use sign language. But obviously, if they were to call you, they would have an interpreter and use VRS, video remote services, throughout the phone call.
Video relay services.
Sorry, video relay services. So I will call my doctor utilizing an interpreter, and they will leave a message. So just to give you an idea of what that's like. So what's happening right now, having an interpreter on the screen is very similar to what we use on the video phone calling a doctor's office. So it's important that you really, you know that. So one of the important takeaways from this presentation for me is that, you know, that we also provide information about deaf culture. And if you would like, you could contact our office and we would send a representative to come and give you more information individually as an agency to give you more in-depth information about deaf culture. We used to provide one-to-one informational training about utilizing TTYs to agencies, because often in the past, people used the TTY, got the TTY to be compliant with ADA, and they didn't know what to do with it. So we would provide that kind of information. So we still provide that type of information. If you need any assistance with that technology, video phone information, even TTY information still, because some people still utilize it.
Thank you.
I have an image of how the video phone works. I could share it in just a moment, but I know we're running short on time, so I just want to add my tidbit. The most important thing to know when working with deaf or hard of hearing people who want a sign language interpreter is to only use a certified American Sign Language interpreter that you request to come to your office, and do not trust anyone else to interpret correctly or accurately. Where I work with the IPV survivors, oftentimes giving the people unintentionally give the abuser the power to interpret, and they intentionally manipulate the message. It stops providers from being able to recognize domestic violence because they're covering it up. It also allows the abuser to come in between help. Like if the police are called to the house and the police depend on the abuser to interpret the situation. And this can also be people who seem to be in a helpful role. Advocates who believe they think they know what's best for the deaf person better than the deaf person knows what's best for themselves. Parents who treat their deaf child like they're always what's it called? Infantilism. Like they'll always be a baby. They don't ever believe that they have the ability or skill to grow up. I must always take care of them. I always know what's best for them. Some parents can act like that, and they want to control the communication to keep that control over the person. So use a certified American Sign Language interpreter.
Yeah, thank you. I would say I used to work at the district attorney's office, and the victim advocates in our office would often say if there was a family or a household where English was not the first language, often it would be the abuser who served as the translator or interpreter, and that would lead to all sorts of issues. So thank you for bringing that up. So I don't know if folks have other questions, if they want to chime in or put them in the chat. I know we are running close to on time, so I really want to thank you both, Samantha and Katerina, for coming today and sharing your perspective and this resources with us. I will say that one of our other themes of this CHNA is health literacy, and we're very eager, and our mission is to make sure that everyone has access to accurate, reliable, science-based health information. And we have a special focus on special populations too. So the deaf and hard of hearing community is definitely a community that we want to make sure has access to that information too. So we might be following up with you, both of you, with some questions about how we can work together on that. So I look forward to that. So I don't see any other questions unless anyone wants to chime in. I know we are getting close to time and some folks may have dropped off. So I guess if unless you wanted to share that screen, Samantha.
Sure.
I think
Can you see the picture?
Yep.
Hold on. I'll fix it. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah, I think folks might be familiar with the TTY system, but this is maybe not something that everyone's as familiar with. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and this is what people are really using.
Yeah.
TTYs are preferred in the elderly community.
That's correct, yes. And deafblind consumers also will utilize the TTY still.
Yeah. Okay.
Just so you see that the hearing person requires no equipment, they just use their phone. So if you're calling a deaf person, just dial their number. If a deaf person calls you, just pick up the phone and accept the call. It's discriminatory to try to refer them to another phone line. Someone calls you and you answer their phone, don't say, oh, I have a TTY number, call that. No, they called you, you answered it, treat it like a regular phone call.
So I guess one quick, hopefully last question. How has the pandemic impacted your ability to serve your clients? I guess a lot of us obviously have switched over to Zoom, and Samantha, thank you for taking over as host and figuring out how to make this work, because I'd still be pressing buttons and flailing around if you hadn't done that. But can you talk just a little bit about how that's impacted your work?
I want to hear Katerina.
Oh, okay. Well, it has been quite challenging, extremely challenging. Sorry, I got a call and I got a visual alert, so that's what distracted me. But yes, not all our consumers have the technology that's required for these Zoom meetings, and we can talk over video phone. Sometimes I ask if they have an iPad. I have to ask a lot of questions so that they're able to, we try to ascertain if they can work through this process. It's been very challenging and it's a learning curve for all of us. Mm-hmm. So we often have video phone appointments Tuesday, Thursdays, if needed, when necessary. If a person doesn't have the technology and don't know and are unable to use it or don't know how, we can show them how. We'll take pictures of their phone and teach them how to use it by distance, because they couldn't come into the office with their, technology. They might have the iPad, but they don't know the process of setting up Zoom. Mm-hmm. So yes, it has absolutely been challenging, but we've gotten better. And we've all learned through this and learned about new technologies. Not everybody is comfortable still with Zoom. You know, it feels like there's a lack of privacy sometimes, that you see everybody. And so there are positives and negatives to everything. But it's been especially challenging for late deaf and hard of hearing people, because they might not have the phone that they need at home. They might have used other things. They weren't used to having interpreters. They use voice carryover sometimes. So you can use your own voice if you're late deaf and hard of hearing, so that you know, for me, sometimes that's more comfortable as a habit to hear my own voice on the phone. And so I don't know, it's been very, very challenging time for hard of hearing folks who might not have had all this access to equipment prior to COVID, and find that it's very difficult to navigate now.
Yeah, I'm finding that I have plenty of tech savvy clients who just don't have internet access or a screen big enough to accommodate. A Zoom meeting on an iPhone is terrible. And it just money.
Yeah.
I mean, some people I work with are on SSI, which is $600 a month, and they can't afford to pay for internet. They can't afford to buy an iPad or a laptop. You know, poverty impacts these people more than COVID does. It's also challenging when there's no choice, like they have to use Zoom. But if there's an in-person option, that works better for some people. So when there's no choice, that creates a barrier. There's positives about COVID on Zoom. I think since COVID, I've had like one interpreter request that was not filled, because the interpreters are not traveling. They're jumping from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting just like us. I get interpreters much more frequently. Same thing for legal interpreters. I used to always go to court to file a restraining order with a client, and we'd always have to come back later because there's no legal interpreter that was going to meet us there. 3 times now, they just pull them up on Zoom. Now in court, in-person interpreters are, in my opinion, necessary. There's too much lost when you're on the screen. I've had clients that I've only met on the screen, met them in person. It's like I was talking to a different person. You get so much more from people in person, especially with such a visual language, body language. You can't see from my shoulders down. I can't see the body language of other people. It changes the message for me, as sign language is being my second language.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, again, I want to thank you both for sharing with us. If you were able to send us those PowerPoints to me directly, and I'll make sure Kim gets them and can send them out to the entire list. And I really will be talking to our health literacy coordinator about reaching out, because I think this is an area ripe for exploration in the health literacy our campaign, and hopefully we can incorporate some of your resources into that. So thank you for that. Thank you to our interpreters for being here today and helping us facilitate this meeting. So we're over time, and I will leave it there. And thank you all for being here. And I don't know, okay, I'm the host now, Samantha, thank you. So I can stop the recording and I can end the meeting. So thank you both, Katerina and Samantha, and everyone have a great holiday. Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.